Well, you've been waiting for a little basketball transfer portal news, the good kind of transfer portal news, the kind where players are coming to your team rather than leaving your team. And it finally happened for Pitt over the weekend as the Panthers landed a transfer center from the Big 12. And you've certainly seen that news by now. Dishon Jackson, the transfer center from Iowa State, coming to Pitt out of the portal, play his final year of eligibility with the Panthers, so we don't need to bury the lead there, pretend like you haven't seen it, or a big reveal after the intro or something like that. You already have seen it. You probably already know the numbers and the stats and things like that, but we've got a lot to talk about with Pitt landing Dishon Jackson. Plus, Jalen Lowe found a new home, so we got that to talk about. There's a bunch of different things that we're going to cover, mostly related to the basketball transfer portal today, as Pitt finally made a move and finally landed someone. What does it mean? What does Dishon Jackson bring to Pitt? What does it mean for the rest of the roster? What does it mean for how Pitt's going to play this season? What does it mean, or next season, I should say, what does it mean for what the Panthers are going to look like? Here on the day of the national championship game, we are talking about Pitt bringing in a transfer center from Iowa State. What's Dishon Jackson mean for your Pitt Panthers? Let's talk about it right here on the Morning Pitt. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's a Monday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You know that website, and if you don't, you should by now. Panther-Lair.com. It's the Pitt sports site on the 247 Sports Network. You know, I've been with the network for about 5 weeks now, and I still am not really sure if it's 24/7 or 247. I always said 24/7. But I guess it could be 247. But either way, go to Panther-Lair.com, and you are going to get the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news that you can find. Football, basketball, recruiting, we cover it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to talk about it. So when the news broke on Friday night that Dishon Jackson was transferring from Iowa State to Pitt, the news got out everywhere really fast, as it always does. But the real... that was when things really started, when people could have the conversation about it, and that conversation was happening on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. There's been a lot of discussion on the message boards since Friday night about Dishon Jackson, what he brings to Pitt, what it means for the rest of the roster, what it means for Cam Corrin in particular, which is a big thing we are going to talk about here today, and what it means for how Pitt basketball is going to look. Because, look, when you're rebuilding the roster in an offseason like Pitt is doing right now, where they only have 4 scholarship players returning and 1 freshman coming in, I mean, you've got a lot of empty spots to fill. And granted, there's no need for them to fill 15 scholarship spots. I mean, you're not going to use 15 scholarship players in a season. But you do need to get to 8 or 9 or 10 so you can field a full roster and go out there and rotate. I mean, I know we talk about Jeff Capel not having a deep bench, but he needs more than 5 guys, I would think. So when we talk about filling out the roster and building the roster, these moves that are made, these transfer portal additions that come in, this is all shaping what the team is going to look like for next season and how they're going to play. Because depending on who they get, it's going to impact how they're going to play and how they have to play. And so this is all, I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here by saying this is all very important and very significant, but just to sort of set the table that bringing in Dishon Jackson, who is not a role player, a bench player. I mean, this is a guy who, over the course of his career, started 82 games. You know, in the last 2 seasons, he started 63 out of 65 games. And so this is a guy who's coming in here to start. This is a guy who's coming in here to play a decent amount. And we'll talk about what the minutes could look like in a second. But this is a significant contributor. There are guys that we've seen them attached to in the transfer portal or linked to or contacting in the transfer portal who I think would, probably be cheap bench guys. They're not going to cost you a lot in terms of NIL or revenue sharing once that comes into play, because all the guys we're talking about here also are being dealt with in terms of revenue sharing, not just the third-party NIL, which is a whole other conversation that we need to have and will continue to have. But when you're bringing these guys in, some of them are going to be lower end of the rotation guys, bench guys who aren't going to cost a lot, but you need those guys. You need them on the roster, even if they're only going to be here for a year and then they're going to transfer somewhere for a better opportunity of playing time. You do need to fill out about 12 scholarship spots just to be able to practice. You know what I mean? Just to be able to go 5-on-5 in practice with scholarship players. And, in case of emergency, you might find yourself needing player number 10, player number 11, player number 12. And so you have those guys. And those guys aren't necessarily going to shape how this team approaches this coming season, and what they try to do or how they try to play. But a guy like Dishon Jackson absolutely impacts and influences and shapes the way this team is going to play next season. So who is he? What is he? Dishon Jackson. He's a native of California, 6'10 guy, 235 pounds. He looks every bit the part of that size. When you watch some of the videos of him playing this past season at Iowa State, where he played in all 35 games, he started 33. He averaged a little less than 20 minutes per game, 18.7 minutes per game. But he averaged 8.5 points and 5.1 rebounds, in addition to 1.1 blocks. So, when you look over the course of his career, over 4 seasons where he's played in 114 games, he's averaged 8 points and 5 rebounds per game. That's kind of the player that he is. His numbers peaked a little bit 2 years ago when he was at Charlotte. He averaged 11 points and 6 rebounds per game, but he's more or less an 8 and 5 kind of guy, or at least that's what he's been. We'll see what those numbers can do or where those numbers might go when he gets to Pitt. We'll talk about that in a second. He's played 4 years, 4 full seasons, but his first season was that 2020-2021 season, the COVID year, where that doesn't count against your eligibility. And so he played 24 games that year at Washington State, started 13 of them, played the next year at Washington State, but moved out of the starting lineup. Only started 6 games, so he went into the transfer portal, ended up at Charlotte, where he started all 30 games. Like I say, he's an 11-6 season, most productive season of his career. And then this past year at Iowa State, playing for the Cyclones, 8.5 points, 5 rebounds per game, and then back into the transfer portal for one more season. This will be his final year of eligibility, and he brings, the biggest, bulkiest center I think Jeff Capel has had. He might have had some centers that are a little bit taller than Dishon Jackson. He might have had some centers that are a little bit bulkier than Dishon Jackson, but I don't think he's had this combination. He looks like a slightly bigger version of Cam Corrin. Now I'd have to see them next to each other to see how they measure up size-wise. And when I say he's a slightly bigger version of Cam Corrin, I'm just talking about size-wise, not necessarily their games, although there are some similarities. Corrin is probably a slightly better offensive player. And maybe it's not slight. He might be a better, more productive scorer. Like I said, over the course of his career, Jackson has averaged 8.5 points per game. Over the course of his career, Corrin has averaged 9.6. So it's not a huge difference. Corrin peaked this year with 11 points per game. Jackson peaked last year at Charlotte with 11.4 or whatever it was. So you have some similar numbers. There are some differences. The rebound percentage, where the percentage of available rebounds that a player collects, Jackson, those numbers favor Jackson pretty much throughout his career compared to Corrin. He's been a better rebounder. His numbers in terms of rebounds per game are only slightly better than Corrin. But in terms of rebound percentage, which I think is a valuable stat, it's not the only stat to consider, and I think rebounds per game is still an important stat and a valuable stat. But in terms of rebound percentage, Jackson has been better. And we know that this team needs improved rebounding. They weren't a good rebounding team last year, and I think a big part of that is that, Cam Corrin is not a great rebounder, not from the center position, and I'm not sure what position he would be a good rebounder from. I think the coaches brought him in with the expectation that he could rebound better than he did during his time at Florida State. The thought was that if they didn't switch defensively, he would get more opportunities around the basket. He would be around the basket more. He would stay around the basket more and then have more opportunities to grab rebounds. And they tried that, and it didn't really work because he didn't really rebound that well. And it turns out he didn't really defend that type of defensive approach very well either. And so they end up going back to switching, and his rebounding numbers are, they just never got any better. And so I think the best intentions there, and it just didn't work out. Now, Jackson has been better as a rebounder, higher rebound percentage. This past year at Iowa State, he grabbed 13.3% of the available offensive rebounds. For comparison, Corrin this past year grabbed 7.7. So you're looking at almost double the percentage of available offensive rebounds that Dishon Jackson grabbed as compared to Cam Corrin. Defensively, it's sort of the same situation. Jackson grabbed 19.2% of the available defensive rebounds. Corrin grabbed 14.5%. And you see a lot of the, I don't know if you can see that as I'm talking, I'm sort of reading off the screen here, but I've got, we're recording this video and I'm looking at sportsreference.com, and I'm looking at Corrin's page and I'm looking at Jackson's page. And if you scroll to the bottom of their pages, their main overview pages, you get to the advanced section where you have the rebounding percentage, and you have the what was this one, win shares or whatever it is. Yeah, win shares and plus minus and things like that. And the numbers, all of those numbers, those advanced numbers, favor Dishon Jackson. And ultimately, like when it comes down to it, the only numbers that really favor Cam Corrin is the overall scoring, the points per game scoring. Because even the offensive and defensive win shares, actually, Corrin has a slightly better offensive win share, 2.1 as opposed to Jackson 2.0. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I know exactly what those numbers mean or how they're calculated. I'm just looking. I'm going to guess that a higher number is better, right? I think that's probably a safe assumption. And in that case, Corrin favors Corrin. So I think if we're comparing these two players, Jackson and Corrin, they're both big guys, both around the hoop a lot. Neither one of them really shoots threes. They're in the lane. They're in the paint. They're trying to finish close to the rim. They're big. They take up a lot of space. Offensively, it favors Corrin. He's a slightly better scorer, a slightly better producer on the offensive end, and puts up slightly better numbers there. Whereas Jackson is a better rebounder by a decent amount more. 1 rebound per game in terms of overall averages. You get into the percentages and whatnot of available rebounds, he's a better option there. But of course, it's a bigger question than just that, though. It's not just about Dishon Jackson versus Cam Corrin, because there's a different way to look at this situation. And it's a bigger question that has come up as, after the news that Jackson is transferring to Pitt. And that question is, could these two play together? And if you shuddered a little bit, if you said, oh, wait, both of these guys on the court at the same time, like Corrin playing the 4 and Jackson playing the 5, and that idea made you feel not good, well, I understand it. It seems, and I don't want to completely parrot what people have been saying on the message boards, but in some cases, I tend to agree with some of their takes on things. And if the idea is to play Dishon Jackson and Cam Corrin next to each other on the court, well, it's an idea. It's true that it is an idea. You have to put 5 players on the court at all times. I mean, it's highly recommended that you put 5 players on the court at all times. And if by chance Jeff Capel decides that those are 2 of the 5 he wants to put on the court at the same time, well, that's a choice. I can't say that I feel it addresses some of their bigger needs from last season, and I can't say that I feel that the rest of the roster is necessarily built to support that kind of a front court. Oh, I can understand you have Papa Amadou Conti as a backup at the center position. You're able to rotate there with Jackson and Conti. But that, I still don't know how the rest of the roster really, because if you're going to play a roster, and look, we're still trying to gather information, gathering facts, right, on whether this is the intention to go with Jackson and Corrin together. If it's not the intention, you have 3 centers on the team now, with Jackson, Corrin, and Conti, which seems like one too many. But I digress. If that is the intention, and you want to go out there with Cam Corrin and Dishon Jackson together, I think you need 3 dead-eye three-point shooters at the 1, 2, and the 3. Because I'm not sure you're going to really get many good looks if you only have 1 good shooter on the floor or 2 good shooters on the floor. I think it's going to be too easy. It's going to be too packed in. There's not going to be enough spacing. And if you think about how Jeff Capel has played basically the entirety of his time at Pitt, how he has the kind of personnel he's put on the court, how he's used them, the 3 and the 4 are almost interchangeable. You could go back 20 years at Pitt, right? And you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 and 2 are guards, 3 is a wing, 4 is a power forward in the post, the Chevy Troutman, and 5 is a center in the post. You know what I mean? I mean, like really, 1 at the top of the key, 2 and 3 on the wings, 4 and 5 down low. Jeff Capel hasn't played that way. 1, 2, and 3 with 4 also on a wing. Almost like, 2 guards at the top, 2 wings of the 3 and the 4, and then the 5 down in the center. And that's generally how they played. I mean, think about where Blake Hinson was. Think about where Justin Champagnie was. Think about where Guillermo Diaz-Graham was this year. They're not playing where Chevy Troutman played. But if you're going to go out there with Dishon Jackson and Cam Corrin playing together, there's no point in having Corrin stand outside the 3-point line. Nobody's guarding him out there. And so you're just wasting time. So you might as well keep him where he belongs, which is down in the post. And now you're playing that old style. They've talked for years. They've talked for years about wanting to drag other teams down to the mud and play the way the old Pitt teams played and try and recapture some of that. Well, if they really want to recapture some of that old glory from the Big East days in the early 2000s, this is the lineup to do it. But the problem is, it's not the early 2000s anymore. It's 2025. And if you're going to try and go out there with these 2 guys together, you better get some scorers. And right now you have Brandon Cummings. Silence. Because that's it. You don't have the other scorers around them. You don't have Jalen Lowe anymore. You don't have Amsal Delilich anymore. Not to mention Zach Austin and Ishmael Leggett, who you lost to graduation. You don't have these guys. You don't have those scorers. Which means the next 4 guys they get out of the portal all need to shoot better than 35% from 3. I mean, really. If this is how you're going to play. And you land a center like Dishon Jackson, and with all indications that Cam Corrin plans to come back, I mean, I guess you could play those 2 in a rotation. Jackson, really he's a 20-minute per game career average. So I guess you could go 20 and 20 or 22 and 18 or something like that with those 2 guys at the 5. But if you intend to go with these 2 on the court together, you better get some scorers. You need some scorers. I mean, they always needed scorers. That was always going to be an important part of the equation and certainly one of the priorities as they went into the transfer portal. Now, I think it's even more if that's what ends up being the plan. But we'll see. Sometimes I always feel like it's important to have the sort of caveat that, landing guys from the transfer portal is a process, and it's results oriented. And the final results are not in. They've gotten 1 guy out of the transfer portal. They'll get more. They obviously have to get a lot more. And that could go into the summer that they're still adding guys from the portal. And so it's not a finished product by any means. We don't have a clear picture of how it's going to work and how it's going to look. Who knows? Cam Corrin could turn around tomorrow or today and go into the transfer portal. I don't think that's going to happen. Our guy Matt Steinbrink says that's highly unlikely to happen, that it looks like Corrin's coming back. But, so you sit back. And you sit back and watch and you see, okay, let's see how it all comes together. But this is what they've got so far. It's a big center, guy from the Big 12, pretty good player, it seems like. Someone who will add a bit of an element, a bit of a unique element, I guess, to the center position. Do a little bit more, maybe, of some of the things that Cam Corrin couldn't. We'll see what happens. Obviously, as you talk about needing to add scoring, one of the reasons you need to add scoring is because you lost your leading scorer from last season. Jalen Lowe went into the transfer portal last week. We talked about that a lot last week. And then over the weekend, he found his destination. Jalen Lowe is going to Kentucky. The fact that Lowe ended up at a high major school is a surprise to no one. I think we all knew he would go to a high major. We all expected him to go to a high major. Miami was the early guess. Texas was involved as well, or so we heard. And Kentucky ends up being the school. I mean, it's a blue blood school. He's going to a blue blood school. And for the people who said, well, good riddance, glad to see him go or something like that. I mean, I understand where you were coming from. His play was not what it was expected to be this year. It was not what Pitt needed it to be this year. And so I get it. But the reality is Jalen Lowe's a pretty good player. And my guess is he'll go to Kentucky and play pretty well and have a really good junior season. And who knows? Who knows what the future will hold for him beyond that? Like I said last week as we talked about it, I always found Jalen Lowe to be personable, nice kid, wish him the best, think he'll do well at his next stop. And, we'll keep an eye on it. I think we've sort of kind of followed what the other, the guys who have left Pitt, what they've done since they left Pitt, and certainly we'll keep an eye on what Jalen Lowe does at Kentucky. You get plenty of exposure to the Kentucky basketball program, I think, no matter where you are in the country, and so it won't be a struggle to, it's not like Federico where you don't really see much of him until the NCAA tournament. I think we'll see plenty of Jalen Lowe throughout the season next year, and we can see how he does. I think he's a really good player, and I think he'll probably do pretty well playing in Kentucky, playing in the SEC. So that's the latest transfer portal movement for Pitt. The Panthers landed a player, so that process is fully underway. I mean, it's been underway. They had visits last week, and now they've got someone out of the portal. They're going to add a bunch more guys, and we'll see who they are as time goes on. They're on a dead period right now through Thursday, and then after that, it is back to live recruiting. Recruits can take visits, transfers can take visits, and we'll see who comes to visit, and we'll see who ends up committing to Pitt as a transfer. So Dishon Jackson's the first. He won't be the last. We'll see who is next. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and that way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. And, of course, check out the website Panther-Lair.com. Hope you had a great weekend. I hope your Monday gets this week off to a great start. We are counting down to the spring game. That is on Saturday, so we'll have a lot of Pitt football to talk all week long on Panther-Lair.com and right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like and subscribe. Have a great Monday. We'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.